Hi, welcome to my video on the restrictions of rational expression. Find the restrictions of a rational expression. In a fraction a over b, b is not equal to 0. Division by 0 is undefined. An example, 11 over 0 undefined, x over 0 undefined, x plus 2 over 0 undefined. And to illustrate that, let me use my calculator and turn it on. And let's take 4 and divide it by 0. 4 divided by 0, it says division by 0 is an error. So that means that when you divide any number by 0, it's undefined. Hence, the restrictions in a rational expression are the values of the variable that make the denominator 0. So in this fraction, 0 is on the bottom. So when x equals 0, we get 4 over 0. 0 is a restriction. When we make x equals 2, so if I make x minus 2 equal to 0, x equals 2 when I solve it. So if I go 3 over 2 minus 2, I get 3 over 0, which is undefined. So that means that 2 is a restriction. Notice here, I got x plus 3 times x minus 3. That will give me a leading power of 2. So that means there's two restrictions. X plus 3 equals 0. X minus 1 equals 0. So when x is a negative 3, or when x is 1, I get, and let's illustrate that, when x is negative 3, let's just put a negative 3 in the expression. So what I'm doing here, I'm putting a negative 3 in for x. Negative 3 here, negative 3 here, and a negative 3 here. That will give me a negative 3 over 0 times negative 4, which is 3 over 0, which is undefined. And the same if I put 1 in here, I get a 0 here, 4 here, and 4 times 0 is 0. So there's two restrictions because the highest power is 2. And in here, this one, the denominator again is x squared minus 4x. The highest power is 2, quadratic. So there's two restrictions. One is when x is 0. The other one is when x minus 4 equals 0. So that means when x is 0 or when x is 4. There's two restrictions. And there's no restrictions here, none, because there's no variable in the denominator. Okay, let's continue. Hence, in a rational expression with the variables in the denominator, you let the denominator equal to 0 and solve to find the restrictions. Note, the powers of x determine the number of restrictions. X to the 1, 1 restriction. X squared, 2 restrictions, if they're not equal. And x cubed is 3 restrictions, if none are equal. That means what we're saying is that in x squared you could have 2, you could have a negative 1 and a negative 1. You could have 2 restrictions, but they're equal. There's a quadratic. In a cubic, you could have 3 restrictions, but they're all equal. So if they're not equal, we'll explain more of that in relation to the section on the quadratics and the cubics, etc. Powers of 1. Notice this is x to the 1, so x minus 3 equals 0. X is 3, the restriction. 2x minus 5x plus 2 equals 0. 5x equals negative 2. Divide by 5. X is negative 2/5 is the restriction. And there's none here because there's no variable in the denominator. Notice here I got an x squared, leading term. So there's two restrictions. One is x minus 1 equals 0. That's when x is 1. The other one is when x plus 3 equals 0, when x is negative 3. So two restrictions. And again, this is x squared, leading power. So there's two restrictions. X equals 0 is one of them. X, x plus 6 equals 0 is the other. So x is negative 6. 0 and a negative 6. When we factor this quadratic, we get x and x. The product is negative 4. The sum is 3, so that's 4 and 1, plus 4 minus 3. So one restriction is when If you let x plus 4 equals 0, x is negative 4. And the other one is x minus 1 equals 0, x is 1. So there's two restrictions, negative 4 and 1. And this one, again, factor. If you factor, you'll see that you have x squared, so there's two restrictions, x plus 5, x minus 5. So one restriction is negative 5 there, and the other restriction is 5. Let them equal to 0 and you'll see. Put a negative 5 right here and you get a 0. Put a 5 right here and you get a 0. And this one is a different, but the 2 is here. So 2 is not equal to 0. So these are the only two. So when x is 4, you have a restriction. When x is 9, you have a restriction. Because when x is 4, that gives you 0. And when you multiply all these numbers by 0, you get a 0. When you put a 9 right here, you get a 0. So 0 times these numbers is 0. So the restrictions are 4 and 9. Without, you can see, notice the restriction here is minus 4, because you're taking the opposite of the plus. Let's continue. Powers of 3. Notice now we have an x times an x times an x. So if you multiply all that out, and I will, I'm going to multiply it fast. Again, x times x is x squared. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. Outside is 3. Inside is negative 1, which gives me a 2. Now if I multiply that by x, I get x cubed plus 2x squared minus 3x. Notice I have power of 3, so there's 3 restrictions. One restriction is x equals 0. The other restriction, x equals 1. And the other restriction is x equals negative 3. So there's 1, 2, 3 restrictions. Notice we have 3 restrictions here when x is 2, when x is negative 1, and when x is 4. 3 restrictions, because x times x is x squared, times x is x cubed. 3 restrictions. And in C, there's an x squared. That's an x squared when you square it out, and that's an x, so it's x cubed. But notice, if you expand this out to look like this, notice the restriction here is 6, the restriction here is 6, the restriction here is negative 2. There are 3 restrictions, but there's a double one. So in this case, we say the restriction is 6 and negative 2, because there's 2 of them equal. Even though it's a cubic, there's 3 restrictions altogether, but 2 of them are equal. So 6 and a negative 2 are the restrictions to give you 0 in your denominator. And practice, find the restrictions. So in this one, easy, 9. Again, pause the video and work these out. So 2x plus 4 equals 0. 2x equals negative 4 divided by negative 2. X equals 2. So when I put a 2 back in here, negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0. Again, notice I got x to the 1 power, 1 restriction. X to the 1 power, 1 restriction. Notice I got x times x. There's 2 restrictions. The restriction here is negative 5. The restriction here is negative 2. Again, you let 6x equals 0. Divide by 6. So x is, divided by 6, x is 0. And right here, you let x equal 0 and solve for x. And you get, notice, a 1/3. Restriction is, there's 2 of them, because 6x times 3x is 18x squared, and the highest power is 2. So there's 2 restrictions. 0 from this one, and positive 1 divided by 3 is 1/3. And we factor this one. Difference of 2 squares, x and x, 6 and 6, plus minus. So the restriction here is negative 6. The restriction here is 6. And just to check that, I'll just check one of them. If I put 6 back in the expression, I get 36 minus 36, which is 0. And if I put negative 6 back in, negative 6 squared, negative 6 times negative 6 is 36 minus 36 is 0. So there's 2 restrictions because of the x squared. And factor this one. We have a 1, so it's an x and an x. Factors of 15 are 1 times 15, 5 and 3. Which pair will give you 2? 5 and 3 will give you the 2. Product is negative, so we have a plus and a minus, so we have a minus 5 plus 3. The restriction is 5. The restriction is negative 3. There's 2 of them. Notice when you factor, it's easy to see them. You have to factor. Factor is ultimate, extremely important to be able to factor. Now, this one is different because this is the tougher one. 3 is not a GCF. So here we go. The product, 3 times 6 is 18. The sum is 7. What's the factors of 18? 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6. Which pair of factors will give you a 7? And what happens? None of them. This can't factor. So right now, it takes more math to find out these restrictions because we can't factor this. Normally, if it's factorable, we can find them easy, but we have to do more math to be able to work this. So if I said this was negative 6, we could handle it. If I put a negative, but right now I can't factor this because the factors of 18 will not give me a 7. Possibility here if I was subtracting. So you have to do more math to get the restriction on this. And this one, I factor, I give you x minus 6. So the restrictions are 3x equals 0. So x is 0. Divide by 3. X minus 6 equals 0. X is 6. So restrictions are 0 and 6. Notice we have x times x times x. That's x cubed. So one restriction is x is 0. Restriction here is 1. Restriction here is negative 4. 3 restrictions. And 3 brackets here, restrictions are, notice, that's a negative 5. Notice this one is a 2. Notice this one, quick way. Your let equals 0, you get a 3. When you move that over, you get a 3, and you divide by 4. Again, to show you that, if you let it equal to 0, you move the 3 to the right to make it positive, and then you divide by 4. So they cancel out, you get 3/4. So what I do in my head, I move that to the right to get plus 3, and then I divide by that number. That's the fast way of doing it. Number 11, I have x squared, so it's x times x plus 10. So that's a 0 there, and a 0 there, and a minus 10 there. So there's only 2 restrictions of 0 and a negative 1, even though this one is a double. And we get x minus 1 cubed, so x minus 1, x minus 1, x minus 1. So there's a 1 there, a 1 there, and a 1 there. So the only restriction in this denominator is 1, but there's 3 of them. But the restriction is 1. 1 is the only number that'll make this denominator 0. But that will come up later on in the higher math. And if you like my video, click the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell because there's more videos coming your way. Also visit my math website, www.mathfullyexplained.com, to find more information about me, my videos, and the content. And that's the content that's going to be on my YouTube channel called Math Fully Explained. Thank you for viewing my video. Bye-bye.